What's up, guys, and welcome back to another video. A lot of you have been asking me to make a video about SharkBite fittings, also known as push fittings, and disaster waiting to happen? Or are they actually a reliable way to make plumbing connections? There are plenty of videos out there that touch on this topic, but I haven't seen one that covers absolutely everything from start to finish. That's exactly what I'm going to do today. I'll show you how these fittings work on the inside, where you can use them, how to install them the right way, and all the pros and cons you need to know. Plus, stick around to the end, because I've got a bonus tip that could save you a ton of frustration if you ever need to work on a pipe that still has water in it. SharkBite fittings have been absolutely work when installed correctly. That's the key word, correctly. And that's what this video is all about. Before we talk about installation, I think it's really important to understand what's actually happening inside one of these fittings. When you know how the components work together, you'll have a much better idea of why certain steps matter and what can go wrong if you skip them. The best way to explain this is to show you a fitting that's been cut open so you can see all the parts. Starting from the outside and working our way in, the first thing you'll notice is the release collar. This is the plastic piece on the outside that you push in when you want to remove the fitting. I'll come back to this in a minute because it plays an important role when you need to disconnect or reuse a fitting. The next component is it goes in easy, but it's not coming back out unless you release those teeth first. This grabbing action is the first stage of completing your connection. Moving deeper into the fitting, you'll find the O-ring support. This piece has two jobs. First, it gives the pipe some rigidity once it's inside the fitting. Second, it keeps the pipe centered so it doesn't damage the O-ring during insertion. If the pipe goes in crooked and nicks that O-ring, you're going to have a leak. It creates a watertight seal around the pipe. This isn't your ordinary rubber O-ring like you'd find in a faucet. EPDM stands for ethylene propylene DNA monomer, which means this rubber is designed to last for decades without drying out. It can also handle the chlorine and chloramine used to treat municipal water supplies. As you push the pipe all the way into the fitting, it hits what's called the stop. When the pipe reaches this point, you've completed the second and final stage of the connection. The teeth are gripping the pipe, the O-ring is sealed around it. When you need to remove a fitting, you depress this collar to deactivate the teeth. SharkBite makes dedicated disconnect tongs that work really well. They also sell a plastic clip that slides over the fitting and pushes the collar in for you. For larger fittings, there are bigger versions of these tools. The last component inside the fitting is the pipe stiffener. If you've worked with compression fittings on PEX tubing, you've probably used brass stiffeners that slide inside the pipe to keep it from collapsing. SharkBite fittings come with these stiffeners already built in, which is one less thing to worry about. Now that you understand how these fittings work, let's talk about where you can actually use them. SharkBite fittings are approved for use with three types of pipe: copper, PEX, and CPVC. That's CPVC. What's really neat is that you can use the same fitting to transition between any of these materials. So if you're adding onto an old copper system with new PEX piping, you just push them both into the same fitting, and you're done. In terms of location, these fittings can with drywall. You can even bury them underground. They're approved for potable water distribution, as well as heating applications. Here's something important. If you're installing a SharkBite fitting underground, it needs to be wrapped with SharkBite's self-adhesive silicone tape. This is a code requirement, and it prevents soil contaminants from getting inside the fitting. I'll be honest with you. A lot of plumbers, myself included, feel a little nervous about installing these fittings in places where they won't be accessible. But if you install them correctly, following all the steps I'm about to show you, there's no reason to doubt them. They're tested, approved, and meet all the building codes. It comes down to your comfort level, and I'll share my personal opinion at the end. All right, now we're getting to the important stuff. This is where most problems happen, and it's where all the controversy comes from. When someone has a SharkBite fitting leak, 9 times out of 10, it's because they didn't prep the pipe correctly. It's not the fitting's fault. Let's start with inside the wall cavity while cutting and prepping pipes. Sawdust, drywall dust, dirt, copper shavings, all of this can end up inside the fitting. If any debris gets between the O-ring and the pipe, you're going to have a leak. Keep your fittings in their original packaging until you're ready to use them. If you've already opened them, put them in a sealed container or a clean bag. If you're finding this helpful so far, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future videos. All right, let's keep going. The next critical step is cutting your pipe correctly. The pipe must be cut straight, and you need to use the right tool. For copper pipe, use a rotary tube cutter with a little cutting wheel that you tighten and spin around the pipe. For PEX and CPVC, use a ratcheting blade-style cutter designed for plastic tubing. Here's what happens if you use the wrong tool. Let's say you cut copper with a hacksaw. Not only is your cut going to be crooked, but it's going to leave a rough, jagged edge on the outside of the pipe. When you push that pipe into the fitting, that sharp edge can catch on the O-ring. Best case, it pinches the O-ring and you get a slow drip. Worst case, it tears the O-ring completely and you got water spraying everywhere. I've seen it happen. Even when you use the proper cutting tool, you're still going to have a small sharp edge left on the pipe. This is called a burr, and it forms on both the outside and inside of the pipe. Both burrs need to be removed before you install the fitting. For the outside burr, SharkBite sells a tool called the deburr and depth gauge tool. It's got a small blade that shaves off that outer edge, and it also has gauge holes that let you mark your insertion depth. This tool costs just a few bucks, and it's worth every penny. For the inside burr, you can use a dedicated pencil reamer, which is a pointed tool with cutting edges that you twist inside the pipe. If you don't have one, a utility knife will work. Just carefully scrape around the inside edge until it's smooth. Some people skip the inside burr because they figure it's not touching the O-ring anyway. Here's the problem. That little lip of metal sticking into the pipe creates turbulence when water flows past it. Over time, that turbulence erodes the pipe material right at that spot. Eventually, to seep past, your pipe is cut straight and deburred. The next step is marking your insertion depth. The pipe needs to go all the way to the stop inside the fitting for the O-ring to seal properly. but you can't see inside the fitting once you start pushing. So how do you know when it's in far enough? There are 3 ways to do this. The first way is to use that deburr and depth gauge tool. It has different size holes for different pipe diameters. Stick the end of your pipe into the correct hole and mark it with a Sharpie right at the edge. The second way is to look up the insertion depth on SharkBite's website. They have a chart that lists the correct depth for every pipe size. A 1/2 inch pipe needs about 1 inch, while a 3/4 inch pipe needs about 1 1/8 inches. The third way only works with SharkBite brand PEX tubing. If you look at the pipe, you'll see arrows printed at regular intervals. These arrows are spaced exactly 1 inch apart. So if you cut right at an arrow, you push the pipe in until the next arrow is flush with the edge of the fitting collar. Pretty clever. Now you're ready to make the connection. Hold the fitting in one hand and the pipe in the other. Push the pipe straight into the fitting with a firm, steady pressure. You'll feel resistance as it passes the teeth and the O-ring. Keep pushing until your depth mark lines up with the edge of the release collar. That's it. You've completed a SharkBite connection. One thing I like about an elbow and the angle isn't quite right, just twist it into position. Let's talk about removing and reusing these fittings. To take one off, use the disconnect tongs or a plastic clip to push in the release collar while pulling the pipe out. The fitting comes right off, and you can use it again. However, there's a limit. The O-ring inside is lubricated so it doesn't roll when the pipe slides past. Every time you remove and reinstall a fitting, you wear off lubricant. After 4 or 5 uses, the O-ring could shift out of position during installation and cause a leak. Unlike some other brands, you can't replace the O-ring in a SharkBite. Also, don't remove the pipe stiffener from the fitting. SharkBite recommends against this because pulling it out can damage the teeth inside. There's no reason to remove it anyway. Now let's talk about common problems and how to avoid them. Most SharkBite failures aren't the fitting's fault. They're user error. The first problem is a slow drip right after installation. You turn the water on, everything looks good, then you notice water forming around the fitting. This is almost always because the pipe wasn't pushed in all the way, or there's debris between the O-ring and pipe. Shut the water off, remove the fitting, inspect everything for making sure you hit that depth mark. The second problem is a leak that develops weeks or months later. This usually means the O-ring got damaged during installation. A rough pipe edge can nick the O-ring without tearing it completely. It seals okay at first, but over time, that cut opens up. The only fix is cutting out the fitting and starting over with proper prep. The third issue is the pipe pulling out. This is rare and almost always caused by not inserting the pipe deep enough. Those teeth grip harder the more you pull, but if the pipe barely made it past them, there's not enough engagement. Mark your depth and make sure the pipe reaches the stop. The fourth problem is using the wrong size fitting. Copper and PEX sizing can be confusing. A 1/2 inch copper pipe and 1/2 inch PEX are close in outside diameter, which is why the same fitting works for both. But grabbing a 3/4 inch fitting for 1/2 inch pipe means no seal. Double check your sizes at the store. The fifth mistake is using fittings on pipe that's in bad condition. Old copper that's corroded or pitted won't seal properly. The O-ring needs a smooth surface. cut back to clean pipe before installing your fitting. If you follow the steps we've covered, you should avoid every one of these problems. Take your time with prep work, and you'll have leak-free connections. Let's cover the pros and cons so you can decide. Simplicity. You can teach someone who's never done plumbing how to install these in 5 minutes. Second is speed. A SharkBite connection takes 30 seconds once your pipe is prepped. A soldered joint takes several minutes between cleaning, fluxing, heating, and cooling. Third is the and risk damage. Fourth is transition capability. Going from copper to PEX to CPVC with a single fitting is incredibly convenient. No special adapters needed. Fifth is cost when you factor in time. A SharkBite elbow costs around $8, which sounds expensive compared to a copper elbow under $1. But add up flux, solder, sandpaper, and time, and the numbers get closer. Sixth, SharkBites can be installed with water still in the pipe. If you've tried soldering with water trickling through, you know it's impossible. The water turns to steam and blows holes in your joint. With push fittings, you shove it on and the O-ring seals even with water present. Now, the cons. The first concern is longevity. These fittings have only been around 20 years. Soldered copper has been proven for over a century. EPDM SharkBite fittings are bulkier than soldered joints. In tight spaces, this can be a real issue. Fourth is cost for large projects. At $8 to $12 per fitting, costs add up. For whole house repipes, would I use them underground? No. Would I bury them in a finished wall permanently? Probably not yet. Would I use them in an exposed location like an unfinished basement or crawl space where I can access them? Absolutely. They're perfect for those situations. SharkBites are fantastic for repairs, temporary connections, and accessible installations. They're approved for behind-wall use and meet all codes. It comes down to your comfort level. For me, I'm not there yet for permanent concealed applications, but I use them all the time for the right situations. Now here's that bonus tip I promised. This one is a lifesaver when you're dealing with a pipe that still has water trickling through. Maybe your main shutoff doesn't close all the way. Whatever the reason, you've got water and need to make a connection. Here's what I do. Open a faucet downstream to let water drain. Have a bucket and rags ready. Water drain. Now, prep your pipe quickly with water still dribbling. Get your burrs removed and depth mark made. Grab your SharkBite fitting and push it on in one smooth motion. The O-ring seals around the pipe even with water present, and you'll see the flow stop immediately. I've done this dozens of times on service calls where old shutoff valves wouldn't close completely. In the old days, you'd need bread or pipe freeze kits to stop the water long enough to solder. With SharkBites, you just push and go. It saved me hours of frustration. One caution. Make sure you're pushing the fitting on straight and all the way to the stop, even with water in the pipe. It's tempting to rush when getting splashed, but you still need to hit that insertion depth. And there you have it. Now you know exactly how SharkBite fittings work inside, where to use them, how to install them correctly, and all the pros and cons to consider. You've got the knowledge to use these fittings with confidence and avoid the common mistakes that give them a bad reputation. If you found this helpful, give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone tackling a plumbing project. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos. Drop any questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching.